Hi everyone and welcome to Talkable Tonight. This is our very first live Facebook session and tonight we're talking all about language delay and what you can do as a mum or dad if you are concerned that your little one isn't talking as much as you'd expected. It's a really common concern, and what I mostly get people contacting me about at Talkable is that their child's just not talking as much as they'd expected. So today we will have about a half-hour presentation. I'll give you that, and then we'll have lots of time for answering your questions. People have been emailing me in some questions during the week, so we can go through those. And if you have questions as we're going along, please type them in the comments box, and I'll try to get to them as we go. If I don't get to them during the presentation, then I'll come back to all the comments at the end. Yeah, just a little bit about me. My name's Karen, as you know, and I am a paediatric speech pathologist. I've been working with kids for the last 15 years, and my passion really is early language development. So that is language development in the first 5 years of life. I work part-time for another not-for-profit organisation here in Perth. And I do Talkable, which is kind of my hobby and something I started when my eldest was only about 6 months old. Talkable is all about, I guess, giving parents the skills and just empowering them to help them make every day really rich in terms of language learning for their child. And it was something that I guess I went through when I had my 2 children. So I guess I wanted to be able to share that with parents so that, you know, it's stuff that you can be doing every day. So that's Talkable. Talkable relies on government grants and other funding to run. So I do lots of presentations for local governments, for other not-for-profits, libraries. I've been working with some childbirth educators and things like that. And yeah, that's Talkable. All right, so as I said, I'm also a mum. I've got 2 kids, Ella, who is 4, just started kindy, and Chloe, who's 2. So I completely understand what it's like being a parent and being busy. Well done for all of you that are tuning in and have managed to get your little ones to sleep. Hopefully mine don't wake up and come knocking during the next hour. All right, so what we'll do, we'll get started with the presentation. I've just a massive disclaimer before we get too far. For anyone who knows me, I am not the most technologically skilled person, but only recently joined Facebook because of Talkable. So this is a bit of a, I guess I'm challenging myself and stretching myself here. So if at any point anything doesn't work, or if I lose you, or if I lose the stream, then I'll endeavour to get you back on board as soon as I can. I'm hoping that I remember to mute and unmute at the right times. But yeah, a little disclaimer for that stuff. Certainly not my strength. But hey, I'm here. So here we go. All right, I'll flick over to my screen share, which is going to be the presentation that I talk through with you today. And then, yeah, I'll come back and answer your questions at the end. All right, so you should be seeing there my Talkable Tonight page, and you know, the presentation tonight is help, my child's not talking much. Let's get started. All right, so tonight we're just going to go over these things. Mostly we're going to focus a lot on typical development and what to expect when, and also when, I guess, what things we should be looking at different ages. We will also talk about how kids learn words, and I want to make sure that I give you some really practical strategies that you can start with your little one from tomorrow. And I'll also let you know about where to get more help. Now that is kind of, you know, that is based around systems here in Western Australia, but it'll be similar throughout Australia. I'm not sure where people are tuning in from, but predominantly I think from WA. And then, like I said, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end of the session. Before we get too far, I just wanted to let you know, I guess, about some of the language I'll be using tonight. Expressive language and receptive language is really what I'm going to be focusing on. So this is your child's ability to express themselves, their expressive language, put their thoughts and ideas into words and to communicate that to you, and their receptive language, which is their understanding. We will also talk about speech, which is kind of the individual sounds that they make. But I think it's important to remember that when I'm talking about talking tonight, I'm not so worried about how clear your child is speaking. I talk generally about how much they should be understood, but that specific speech sounds that will develop over time, and it is very typical for them to be unclear their first words. So just focusing on expressive language and receptive language tonight. All right, what I wanted to just start with is really about how kids learn language. And there's this really great analogy about serve and return, and it's the idea that kids are serving to us all day and waiting for us to return a serve in terms of their language development, and actually in terms of all their development. So this really sets us up to understand that kids are born hardwired to learn, and that they come with an innate ability to actually learn language. So for the vast majority of kids, picking up language is fairly effortless, and I guess it just relies on having a good environment to learn language and responsive caregivers as well. So for most children that is the case, but not for all. And so we'll be talking about for those kids that find it a little bit harder. So what we might do is we'll watch this little video about this concept of serve and return, because it just is a good foundation to kids learning language. So just bear with me while I turn this video on.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
All right, so that was just a really, really broad brush over, over what is happening inside a child's brain when they're learning language or when they're interacting with us. And I think what I really like about that video, and it comes from the Centre for the Developing Child, which is a fantastic resource about evidence-based learning in the early years, is that although what is happening inside a child's brain is extremely complex and we really don't fully understand what is going on, what us as caregivers need to do is fairly simple. And what it shows in that video is that when a child offers up a serve or it initiates an interaction with us, we need to return that serve and we need to respond in a focused, appropriate way at that moment. So the concept of doing it in the moment that the child is thinking of an object or an action is called mapping, and that's really fundamental to what we need to do when we're interacting with kids. All right, so keep that in your mind, and we'll come back to this concept of serve and return when we're going through some strategies later in the presentation. I just have put there, what examples do we use every day of serve and return? And for some of you, I know one of you out there has a very tiny little baby who will be serving to you all the time, mostly probably through crying, but maybe through a little bit of eye gaze, and not too long through some vocalizations that they'll make. But at different ages, kids serve in different ways. So, for example, a child who's 6 months will be doing lots of looking at you, waiting for you to make eye contact. That is inviting you in to talk or to explain something that's happening. They might point, they might grizzle, they might do many, many things. But throughout the day, kids are giving us these, initiating these interactions, and they are the times that we can really build on their language. All right. I just wanted to quickly show you this. It really shows how important the early learning is, and in the first few years of life, how adaptable the brain is and how much your children are actually learning. So you can see the red line here is how easy it is for the brain to learn a new skill or to adapt, and this is the amount of effort that we need to put in to make that change. When a baby is born, their ability to change in response to experiences and to learn new things is huge, and the amount of effort that needs to be put in is minimal. And that is why so much learning happens so effortlessly for kids in these early years. And over time, a brain's ability to change and respond decreases, and the amount of effort increases. For me, mid-30s, you can already see, yes, I'm past the peak of learning. I can still learn new skills, like a new language or an instrument, but it is going to be more effort than the ability to change. So I'm going to need a lot of effort. And that is why interventions that happen early on are much more successful than if we wait till later and try to fix problems. And that fact is a little bit to do with the way neural connections are developed. I promise I don't have too many more screens like this, but this one here is just showing these are the neural connections, the neurons in a baby's brain. This is at birth, so you can see pretty sparse. We do have some neural connections, and certainly there's lots of learning happening in utero. By 6, look at that. Look how densely connected the kids' neural connections are. But then by age 14, you can see that it's kind of pared back a bit. And what happens is that, after 6 years and into the teenage years, the brain goes through this process of pruning. It gets rid of neural connections that it's not using very often, and that's to help it be more efficient and to be more effective. But what we need to make sure is that all brains go through this process, so that at 6 years we want some really dense neural networks, because that is what the foundation upon all our later learning is going to be. One amazing fact there. A baby's brain is forming 1 million new connections every second. Now, this is, again, an estimate based on heaps of neurodevelopmental research, and you can find out more about that on the Centre for the Developing Child website, which I'll post after this video. But basically, this is not specific to language, but when a child is awake, they are taking in visual stimulation, they're hearing things, they're smelling things, they're responding to stimuli in their environment, and their brain is automatically making 1 million new connections every second. Now, obviously, that's going to be optimized in environments that are more stimulating and stimulating in an appropriate way, in a way that's going to actually foster learning, and that's what we'll talk about. All right, so some kids seem to just pick up language, and for other kids, it is harder. And we'll talk about the factors that affect language development, and I just want to talk about these now. Firstly, I want to say it's nothing that you've done. It's just, it is individual to individual kids. There are genetic factors as well as other things. So let's go through factors that are impacting a language learning. Now, I kind of talk about the factors that are innate to the child. So there are things that a child is born with and that develop over time, but things like their memory ability, their hearing, their attention, their movement and coordination, and also their ability to kind of process auditory information, they're child-related factors. So, for example, a child who might have recurrent ear infections, they're going to have some difficulty with their perceptual skills and maybe their auditory processing. That's going to impact language learning. For kids that have difficulty coordinating movements, they're going to find speech and language and learning to talk hard too, because it's one of the most complex movements we make. And so factors associated with movement and coordination can cause speech and language difficulties. Memory and attention develop over time. And, I think this is something that we need to really understand, is that most babies and toddlers have very short attention spans, and so we need to make the most of the attention span. But it will be individualized for different children. So they're the child-related factors. We can influence them to a small degree, but largely that's what our child's been coming to this world with, and that's what we've got to work with. We can't change the way our child is, but we can modify the environment keeping these things in mind. If we know that we have a child that has difficulty hearing, then we need to modify the environment accordingly. If their attention is really short, we need to modify what we're doing and how we engage them to maximize their attention. And the other factors are their temperament and learning style. And if you go to any playgroup, any childcare centre, you will see 12 different children with 12 different temperaments and learning styles, and it changes from day to day. So that's important to know as well. Then we need to really think about that when we're factoring in the way we are approaching and interacting with our kids and how we are wanting to maximize language learning. So again, all of those things are child-related factors, and then they lead to the ability for a child to learn words. So word knowledge is really all the words your child already knows, and conceptual skills are the concepts and their understanding of those words. So word knowledge we talk about is kind of the vocabulary, how many words do they have, and the conceptual skills is what do they understand? Do they understand things like hot and cold, fast and slow, bumpy, rough, smooth? Do they know what an apple is? That's conceptual skills. Now, what we know is that the more language you have, the easier it is to learn new words. The more concepts you have, the more dense your neural networks are, because you start linking ideas together. You start linking cat and whiskers and that it's an animal. But we need to have all those words and all those concepts to start to make those links, okay? So language development isn't linear, which means kids don't just learn 2 words every day for their whole life. It starts off slow and then it really picks up, and it is a bit exponential in terms of language growth, and then it slows down again. Okay, and what we want to see is that burst of language learning earlier on, because that's the foundation for all their literacy skills that come later. So if you talk to a kindy teacher, they don't worry too much about whether your child knows all their shapes or their colours, all those things. They want to know what their oral language is like. They want to know that they have good vocabulary and things like that. And that the learning to read stuff, that'll come once they have a really solid foundation. Okay, and then the other 2 factors which I really am going to focus on, and that are the ones that we have the most control on, is how much child-directed speech are we giving our kids in a day, and how engaging are these interactions? Because what we know from research is that if I'm having a lovely chat to my partner, I might be talking about the weather, I might have even be talking to him about what I was doing that day with the child, but my little ones are getting very little out of that, unless it is really directed at them. Okay, they're tuning out, and often the language is kind of too complex and they're not engaged. And again, engaging interactions. If I am spending my whole day trying to get my child to hurry up and do what I want them to do, chances are they're going to be fairly bored with me and not engaged in my language. So those are the 2 things I think that we need to keep in mind when we're really trying to increase language learning. All right, so just summarising, some things are child factors, and there are a couple of things that are environmental factors that we as parents and caregivers really need to maximise and to work on to help kids learn language. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about typical development now, and I could have started from birth and moved right through, but I just really wanted to focus on some real key areas. Babies are amazing. They come into this world as these little wiggly, squirmy things, and by 1 year, they are learning to talk. Okay, they can understand huge amounts by the time they're 1, and they can, babies who use sign are starting to use gesture to communicate at 9 months, so even before 12 months. So really what I wanted to say, main thing for this one, is that first words come at around 12 months. And that gestures usually start around 8 to 9 months. So that's pointing, waving, blowing kisses, all those kind of things. Now, what are the red flags? What are we worrying about? What should we be looking for when a child's 12 months? Well, firstly, we really want to make sure that they're responding to noises in their environment, particularly to voices. So they should be turning and engaging when they hear someone talking. If they're not really enjoying interacting with others, then that's a bit of a red flag. And if they're not engaging in what we call turn-taking activity, so that could be things like peekaboo. It could be any of, blowing bubbles, any of those kind of turn-taking activities that you do where you have a turn and then your child has a turn, and they happen throughout the day. And, it can be even with little ones making a raspberry and then stopping and seeing what your child does. Usually they'll imitate you back. If by 12 months they're not really babbling or making sounds, or then I would be seeking a second opinion or a bit more advice at that stage. And if, like I said, they're not engaging in what's happening in the environment. Okay, so 12 months, kids start to learn their first words. It doesn't mean that on their first birthday every child will learn to say mum. It's not the way it works, but roughly we should be seeing them moving towards looking like they're going to start talking at about 1. Now, from 1 to 2, again, huge amounts of development. By the end of their second year, we want to see toddlers that have about 100 words, all right, and starting to put 2 words together. So they go from using very first words to having a vocabulary of at least 100 words, and sometimes it will be more than that. At 18 months, they're understanding about at least 50 words, and we like to say that we want to see about 20 words at 18 months. So that you can see from 12 to 18 months, we want to see some of that vocabulary start to develop. They're starting to imitate others, things that you do in their play, which is a really fantastic and lovely thing to see. So they'll be pretend talking on the phone, they'll be cooking, they might be putting your washing in the washing machine, all those things. That's their pretend play. Now, by 2, it's important to know that kids' speech can still be a bit difficult to understand, and that someone who doesn't know your child will understand about half of what they say, okay? You might understand way more than that, but some, the lady at the shops who doesn't know your child will probably understand about half of what they say and need you to interpret the other half. Red flags by 2 years. So really, if your child has less than 100 words at 2 and they're not putting 2 words together, then that's a time to go to your child health nurse or GP or speech pathologist to get a little bit more help. If they're not really following directions, or if they're not answering any questions, and remember, going back, the questions that they're answering are really simple questions like what have you got, maybe what, where, maybe who. So some of those really, really early questions, okay? If they have absolutely no interest in other kids, that's important to just keep an eye on. They're not going to be playing together cooperatively. There'll be lots of playing side by side at this age. But it's just, just have a look at how your child's interacting with other kids, and also their play. So what are they doing in their play? Are they starting to use pretend play with their toys, which is what I said was that copying things like, putting their teddy to bed, feeding their teddy, and those kind of things are pretend play. And if at 2 their speech is very unclear, as in that you as the parent are really struggling to understand them, then again, that's also a time to seek a bit more help. All right, we're going to go up to 3 years today. So again, amazing. A 3-year-old sounds or should sound like a mini adult, really. They're starting to put some really complex sentences together, and you can understand most of what they say. So your 3-year-old should be understood by, even strangers most of the time. They're starting to play with other kids just really for very short periods, and they're starting to understand more complex instructions. They still have difficulty with some of those more difficult questions like how and why, although they will start to ask those questions on repeat, which can drive you a little nuts. By this age, they're using grammatical markers, which means that they are starting to mark things like tense. So they'll say, I jumped rather than I jump. They might still make some errors, like they might still say I runned instead of I ran, but they're starting to use grammar, and this is only by 3 years of age. Okay, so they're using 4 or more words in a sentence, and you can have a little conversation with your 3-year-old, and that's kind of what we should be expecting. By 3, we want to make sure they're communicating in short phrases. If they're not doing that, if they don't seem to understand what you're saying to them, that's important to get that checked out. And again, looking at those little conversations, are they having those with you? Can they sustain them for a few turns each? And again, looking at their play, they should be really doing a lot of those social behaviours or pretend play. And remember, at 3, even an unfamiliar listener should be able to understand most of what your child is saying. All right, so what is language delay? Well, according to the research, language delay officially is children at 2 who have less than 50 words and are not yet putting 2 words together. So sometimes this will be, this will be called late talkers or late language emergence. Okay, so this is when children are getting, have less than 50 words at 2. What all the research is starting to say is we actually want kids to have about 100 words at 2. And I will put another couple of links at the end of this talk to some great, really quick articles on the Hannon website, which is all about early language development. Now, also importantly, is that I like parents to start looking out for vocab at 18 months as well. Okay, so at 18 months, we want to be seeing about 20 spoken words. They don't need to be clear. They just need to be kind of consistent words or sounds or groups of sounds that your child uses to represent words. Okay, so 18 months, about 20 words. All right, it's super common. 30% of kids will have a language delay. What we don't know is which kids are going to catch up. And what research is showing is that without intervention, the kids who do catch up tend to have a bit more difficulty with literacy tasks later on, so some of that learning at school. So what we know is that maybe their oral language catches up, but it seems to be having an impact on their reading and writing skills a bit later on. So I guess the take-home message is that we recommend that kids who are late to talk do get some help sooner rather than later. Now, what we do know is that there is an increased chance that your child's going to find learning language difficult if they have had recurrent hearing problems, and usually we talk about middle ear infections. If they're haven't really used gestures to communicate, so if they're not pointing, if they're not trying to get their message across. Children who also have problems with understanding, not just talking, tend to have an increased chance of ongoing difficulties. And if there's a family history, so if your mother-in-law is saying, oh, Joe, he didn't talk till he was 4, that's, I think, important information to know as a parent, because it may indicate that let's get in earlier. There is an increased chance that there might be ongoing difficulties with that genetic element. All right, well, let's get to what we can do every day. So there are so many things that you can be doing every day. Sorry, there we go. The very first thing I say to parents is follow your child's lead. And when we go back to those environmental factors, so the things that are important to encourage language development, one of them is engaging interactions. And I tell you what, if your child leads in play or in conversation or in any daily interaction, they are engaged. and if you're following them their lead, much more so than the times when you're having to get them to follow you and that you're, like I was saying before, rushing, or that you're needing to get them to do something that you want. So follow your child's lead. And I often say to parents, get down on the floor, get to their level, watch what they're looking at, and let them take the first turn. And a turn might not be talking, but a turn might be reaching out for a toy. It might be giving you something. And that is, again, their serve when they take the first turn. So follow your child's lead. Okay, so when you're doing that, what do? Okay, you talk about what they are doing. And it's important that we're keeping the language simple but grammatically correct, and that it is directed at the child. I do see parents sometimes who find this really hard, and that they almost tend to narrate what the child is doing, but as if they're narrating it for another adult. So they almost put adult-like speech into their child's brain. But what I want you to be doing is talking about what they're doing in that moment. So if they're playing with a toy car, you'd be doing things like saying, brum, brum, push the car, push, 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 up it goes, whee, down the slide, something like that, that you're using very short phrases, but you're talking about what they're doing. The next thing we'll talk about is this concept of repeating, modelling, and expanding. So repetition is really just tuning in, following your child's lead, and repeating what they're saying. And it doesn't have to be a word. So if your child loves to make noises during their play, then I would let them make the noise and repeat it back to them. And what that's saying to your child is, oh my gosh, mum's listening, dad's listening, Joe's listening. They're tuning into me. I'm important. What I'm saying, well, that must be interesting to them because they're repeating it. And often when you repeat what your child does, they will engage with what you're doing. Modelling is just exactly what it says. It's putting words onto what they're doing. And, that's the same as point 2. So talk about what they're doing. And the final one there is expanding. So for kids who are just starting to talk, maybe have a few single words, you would expand on that utterance by maybe adding one word. So if they say car, you might say noisy car, if it's a noisy car, or you might say blue car, or you might say fast car. But what you're doing is you're expanding. You're using one more word. I think the other really important thing to talk about is when you're modelling, that you want to focus on action words. You want to focus on what we call verbs, because those words are harder to learn, but once they have them, the naming words tend to come. So words like apple, banana, orange, they tend to come fairly easily to kids. They're very tangible. Kids can see what those things are when you're saying them. But action words are a lot harder. Like if I'm talking about the word pour, I need to be saying that word as I'm pouring water or orange juice or milk from the bottle into the cup. I need to be mapping it. I need to be using that word as that action's happening. It's over. Actions are only really time limited. They disappear. So we talk a lot about focusing on action words as being a really important words to model to kids. Number 4. Focus on being a teacher and not a tester. And so many times I see these interactions between parents and kids turn into a bit of a power struggle or a bit of a what's this, as parents are desperately trying to get their kids to name and use words. But it's not a natural way to communicate, and it doesn't encourage language development. It does encourage them to learn the phrase, what's this? Because it's getting modelled so many times, but it's not encouraging them to learn the words that are around them in their environment, learn vocabulary and conceptual skills. And that's where it's all about teaching. And I say to parents, we can't actually make our kids talk. I mean, how brilliant would it be if you could just say, okay, talk, and they would talk. But we can help them understand. We can create environments that are really rich in language learning and that repeat key concepts, action words, we can be in control of how much we talk to our kids and how rich those learning interactions are. Okay, so we want to focus on, rather than helping our kids learn to talk, we want to focus on helping them understand, because we know the more words they have in their receptive language, or the more words they understand, the more likely they are to start to use those words expressively, to talk about the world around them. So really important to not be constantly testing our kids, and to not fall into that trap of trying to do that. And the fifth one is reading with your kids every day. And I've really put there read with your child, not read to your child, because I think they're really different things. When you're reading with your child, we're really encouraging our kids to lead. So from the very beginning, we'll be letting the child choose what book they want to read. And you know what? It's probably going to be the same book they read yesterday and the day before, and they might have an obsession with trucks or dinosaurs or The Very Hungry Caterpillar. But you know what? If we choose that book, they're engaged. And what do we know? If they're engaged, they're going to be learning. Okay? So we're letting them choose the book. We're going to let them hold the book too. Okay? So really following their lead. Buy board books rather than books you're worried about the pages ripping, because we want kids to be able to flip between their pages. We're going to let them turn the pages. So they've chosen the book, they're holding the book, they're turning the pages. And what are we doing? We're talking about what they're doing. So we're doing number 1 and number 2. We're following their lead and we're talking about what they're doing. They might have one favourite page, and I know my Chloe, she loves The Very Hungry Caterpillar, but she just loves that page with all the food on it. There's a watermelon, there's a sausage, there's a lollipop, there's a piece of chocolate cake, there's an ice cream cone. I've looked at that page for hours, I'm sure. And so we talk about that page and we go back to that page, and in one sitting of reading that book, we might spend 10 minutes on that page. But she's engaged, she's pointing, she's offering up, she's in those interactions, she's taking the first turn, and I'm just going with that. Okay? So reading with your child every day means letting them take the lead. And that might be a bit different. And for really young children, obviously you might be choosing for them, for babies. And sorry, I should say this is from birth. Never too early to start reading, even in utero, I say. But for very young children, you're choosing the books, fair enough. But once they have the ability to choose, we really let them choose. And their attention span is short. Okay, toddlers don't want to sit for hours and hours and read millions and millions of books, and that's okay. We work with them. We work with the short amounts of attention they have, and we build on that over time, because you know what? If they start to realise, hey, reading is fun, I get to sit with mum, I get all this attention, I get cuddles, they will become more and more interested in reading for longer and longer periods, to the point where you probably they'll be requesting 4 or 5 or 6 books. Okay, but that skill's not going to develop unless we encourage it. All right. Okay. So these are some things that you can really start doing. You can start from tomorrow morning. These are some of the things that you can be doing that are going to really be helping language development. All right, where to get help? So I'm assuming a lot of you out there you're thinking, yes, Karen, I've been doing these things, I know these things, but I feel like still, I need a bit more help. My child doesn't have those 20 words at 18 months, or they're not at 100 words at 2. So what can I do? Where can I get help? Well, first I would say child health nurses and GPs are great people to go to have that initial chat about, oh, I'm worried about my child's language and I'm worried they're a bit late to talk. I think it's important with your GP to go in kind of knowing those milestones though, so and that we don't really recommend a wait and see approach anymore. That we know that at 18 months those 20 words is critical, and again at 2 we really want 100 words and then putting some words together. And then they can refer you to a speech pathologist, or you can actually self-refer to a speech pathologist. And you can go publicly or privately. Here in Western Australia, you go to the Child Development Service, and I will put up a link to their website and their referral form. both public and private services are fantastic in Australia. The only issue is that usually you will have to wait for public services. So if you just can't wait and you want to see someone sooner, head on to the Speech Pathology Australia website. That is our governing body, and you can search for a speech pathologist that is near you. Okay, and you can choose one that specialises in language delay or late talkers. What I will say is that if you are accessing a private speech pathologist and you have extras cover through your private health, you will be eligible for some rebate. And with the GP, you can get access to some Medicare rebates through them. So have a chat to your GP if they refer you privately, so that you can get something back. If you also have concerns about other areas of your child's development, maybe they're not walking as confidently as you would have thought, or they've been delayed in other areas of their development, or you're worried they're not interacting in the way that you would expect them to, or their play seems a bit delayed, then seeing a paediatrician can be really beneficial too. Again, you can do that publicly or privately. The wait for public paediatricians is long, so it might be worth seeing a paediatrician privately. The other thing I will talk to you about is I also have a Talkable app, and I think a lot of you know about this. This has been developed through, I guess, years and years of experience of working with kids, and it's a 10-week program all about ways to help language learning. So we've talked about a few of those strategies tonight, but basically the app goes through one strategy each week, and also covers off on using some keyword signs with your little one, and book sharing. So it really covers a huge amount of information over 10 weeks. And you can check that out on the Talkable website, or you can search for it on the Google Play or the iTunes stores. It will be on there. Recommend that one for kids under 3 that aren't talking very much. All right, so that's really for kids up to 3 years. All right, we have kind of got to the end of the formal part of our presentation. So now it's over to you to answer questions. And look, what I will do, I've had a few questions be emailed in to me, so I will go over those and any questions that have come out through the presentation. And then once I get to the end of all that, I'll hang about and I will be online until about 8:30, so about another 15 minutes, just answering any questions that you have. You can either message me privately, or you can put them under the comments in this live video. All right, let me just sort my screens out for you. All right, so I'm back. Hello, screen sharing is over. Let me just pull up some of the questions that we have had. All right, one of the questions that's come up is, thank you, Fran, very much for your lovely comment there. Kay Patel has asked, is the app free? No, the app is not free. It is super cheap though, so it's $4.50, I think, the price of a cup of coffee. And that really just helps me fund other aspects of Talkable updates and things like that. So yeah, check it out. It is only $4.50, so super cheap. All right. Okay, so the other questions that came in during the week. One parent I had, and this again, I welcome any questions at this point. It doesn't have to be related to the topic we've talked about, but anything to do that you can send about with speech and language development. One mum has asked me about her child who has a lisp. She's 3 and she has a lisp, so that we call that an interdental S. And she's like, what should I do? People are saying she's going to grow out of it. Is that true? When should I be worried and when shouldn't I be worried? And so the advice in terms of lisps, and I put my hand up and say both my little girls have lisps and still have lisps, is that it can be a typical developing speech error. So for some children, and for other children not. So some children will never have a lisp, but for some children it appears to be typically developing, but it should resolve by about 4.5. Okay, and the issue is if it hasn't resolved by about 4.5, then there's the risk that it will become a bit of a habitual speech pattern, or that it'll become a habit, that's the way they will continue to speak. And we know adults that have a lisp. And so what we tend to say is, let's keep an eye on it till a child is about 4.5, and then that's when we need to really get in and do some intervention. Typically, kids aren't really ready for the kind of intervention and speech sound practice until they're about 4.5, 5 anyway, but it is important to just keep an eye on it. It is important to also know that there are different types of lisps. Who would have known? And that an interdental S, so that's where the tongue comes through the teeth. So saying thun for sun, or my little one says thushi for sushi. That is typically developing for some children, but the lateral S, so a lisp that is like sushi for sushi or shun for sun, is not typically developing it. And I would always suggest that you see a speech pathologist as soon as you kind of are noticing those sounds coming through. All right, so lisp, wait until about 4.5 to see how they go. Another question came through about the app. So the question was, my little one is 2 years and 9 months. Is this app going to be good for me? And I would say yes. If your child is late to talk and you want kind of some strategies to really help you get the foundations in enriching language learning, then I think the app is really great. It's also great if you want to learn some keyword signing, or what we call baby sign. So any parent can kind of use this app to really look at how they can really help with language development in those first 3 years. I had another question about when is the app. Sorry. So I had another question come up. When can I watch these Talkable Tonight videos? Well, I am hoping that this is streaming live, and that when I finish up, that it will save on the Talkable Facebook page. So if you can't tune in for the hour that I'm talking, don't worry, you should be able to watch it later. That is what I'm hoping will happen. So we'll wait and see. Fingers crossed. And the final question I had come through the email was around 5 words at 18 months. And look, I've just seen Tamara's just posted a question there about my daughter is 20 months. She only has about 8 words. Follows simple instructions, understands some actions. She's using pretend play, gestures, and she's said here, heard before that you can wait until 2. What would you reckon? Would I agree with that? This is a really tricky one, and similar to the one that came in. So 5 words at 18 months was the one that came in. 8 words at 20 months. Look, I would say that I would be starting to think about getting in to see a speech pathologist. And typically what I recommend at this age is that if you are thinking you want to also access public speech pathology services, then get a referral in now, because it's likely there'll be a bit of a wait. And that can be a time where you continue to monitor the words, okay? So I would be saying at 20 months, she only has about 8 words. I guess what is important to know is that, like I said, language development and bursts of language development can happen really quickly. And kids that have 8 words one week, the following week can have 25, 30 words. But what I would say is at 20 months, she's kind of 4 months off that 2-year age. If she's got 8 words, she won't probably have enough words to start putting words together. So we know that, 200 words is a little bit of a tipping point when we start to then see word combinations happen. So I would be saying, to get in and just get a little bit more advice about what might be going on for your little one and how best to help with language learning. So I would say to get in and see a speech pathologist when you can. All right, I think that is all the questions that have come through for now. So what I'll do is I'll sign off, but I will stay on the Talkable Facebook page. And if you have any questions in the next 10 minutes, please ask them away, or you can always private message me. Otherwise, I will see you in a month's time, and we'll be talking all about ear infections and language development, because that again is something that lots of us parents go through, and it's important to know about the impact of ear infections on language development. So until then, I'll see you later.